Keith Jesperson was born on April 6, 1955, in the small town of St. John, Canada. His early life was marred by violence, neglect, and emotional abandonment, elements that would eventually shape his personality and actions in terrifying ways. The road to becoming one of the most infamous serial killers in America didn't begin with a single moment of evil, but with a series of compounded experiences that twisted his psyche. Growing up in a dysfunctional and abusive household, Jesperson's formative years were spent in an environment that was far from loving. His father, Albert Jesperson, was a man known for his violent temper and alcoholism, which often spilled over into physical abuse toward his wife and children. Keith, the oldest of 5 children, was often a witness to his father's unpredictable rages. The fear and helplessness of living in an abusive household would later evolve into an overwhelming sense of anger and powerlessness, emotions that would remain with him throughout his life. At a young age, Jesperson began to develop a desire to control and dominate those around him, a trait that would eventually be reflected in his gruesome crimes. His mother, Elaine, was emotionally distant and often powerless to stand up to her husband's aggression. Jesperson later admitted that his relationship with his mother was strained. She was emotionally unavailable, and the lack of nurturing and affection in his early years deeply affected him as a child. Jesperson often sought refuge in his imagination. He was a solitary figure, shunned by his peers and bullied for his awkwardness. This sense of isolation became a cornerstone of his personality. Jesperson was far from a popular or charismatic child. Instead, he was a loner, and as he grew older, he began to retreat further into himself. He later recalled that his early experiences made him believe that violence was an effective way to get what he wanted, the formation of a dark fantasy. As Jesperson entered adolescence, his personality began to reflect the damaged foundation of his early years. He struggled to connect with others, and his isolation grew. His experiences with violence and emotional neglect fueled his internal anger and resentment toward the world around him. He began to fantasize about exerting control over others' fantasies that eventually evolved into something far darker. In his early teenage years, Jesperson became fascinated with serial killers, particularly with their ability to elude capture. He saw them not as monsters, but as figures of power, men who were untouchable, who could take lives and play with the police and public in ways that fascinated him. These ideas began to consume him. It was during this time that the first seeds of his sadistic desires were planted. Jesperson's troubled teenage years were marked by a deepening interest in domination and violence. He was still an outsider in school, often mocked and ridiculed by his peers, which only strengthened his sense of alienation. His emotional and psychological development was severely hindered by the lack of love and stability in his home life. Jesperson started to imagine how it would feel to be untouchable, how it would feel to have the power to take someone's life and control their fate entirely.